Déjà m'arrivé, guns everywhere. People don't care, people don't care. Hey. Blood everywhere. We're living in fear, living in fear. Le pays va mal, trop de problèmes, ça ne va pas. Oh, yeah. C'est pas le jadis toi qu'on veut raconter à nos enfants.
On compte trop de larmes, on compte trop de drames, on perd trop nos...
Hello, everyone. Aren't technical difficulties exciting and fun? We are very excited to be here today. I'm Priska Neely, and I'm the managing editor of the Gulf States Newsroom. We are a regional newsroom, and we've been up and running for a couple of years now. And we are all about trying new things to tell stories and get important work out in this region. So we are going to be doing that today with a listening session to give you a chance to hear some of the important work that we've done. Maybe you've heard it already, but you'll hear it again. And then we'll have a conversation with some of the people behind that work. So we're really excited to be able to share that with you today. First, I'm just going to give you a few deets about the Gulf States Newsroom, and then we are going to hear a little bit from Bobbi-Jeanne Misick, who is the reporter behind all of this amazing work, and then we'll get started. So first, the Gulf States Newsroom, as I mentioned, is a regional newsroom. We are a partnership among stations in Alabama, Louisiana, and Mississippi. So these are our partner stations, and we're all working together with NPR to make sure that important stories from the region are reaching people locally and nationally. This is our team. This is our awesome team. We have editors and reporters across the region covering issues, and we work together as a regional team doing stories that come to you on the radio, but also are online and also now coming to you through listening sessions like this. We cover a number of beats. We have healthcare, wealth and poverty, criminal justice and immigration, reproductive health, and environmental justice. And the thing that I really love about our coverage is the intersections that we really have between all of those beats and areas, because health impacts criminal justice, impacts wealth and poverty, reproductive health, environmental justice, and the environment that we live in. We talk a lot about the social determinants of health and the fact that everything, everything is interconnected, and we look for those intersections in our coverage. This story that we did was an exciting partnership with Type Investigations, and Bobbi was part of a fellowship that I am going to now turn it over to Noy Thrupkow. Noy, if you want to turn your video back on, and I'll pass it over to you just to give folks a little bit of information about that fellowship.
So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Noy Thrupkow. I am the director of the Ida B. Wells Fellowship Program that supported Bobbi's work last year. Type Investigations is a 25-year-old nonprofit newsroom, and we primarily work with independent journalists in supporting their investigations on racial and economic justice, climate and environmental health, and civil and human rights. And we partner with newsrooms all around the country to publish that work, and are particularly excited to support more local and community-led outlets in expanding their investigative work. So Bobbi's series is a prime example of the power of those partnerships. It's because Bobbi and Gulf States Newsroom are so rooted in their communities, but also have regional and national reach, that this series has had such impact. So I direct the Ida B. Wells Fellowship Program, which was launched in 2016. And that fellowship was designed to support reporters for underserved backgrounds in launching their first investigative projects. It was such an honor to work with Bobbi and the Gulf States Newsroom team on pieces that combined data techniques, really sensitive, in-depth interviews, and extensive document work to create a series that was both so moving in introducing us to people like BJ and Fabrice, and so hard-hitting in its investigation into a deeply disturbing system where Cameroonians applying for asylum too often endured the exact opposite of the protection that they sought. It's an honor also to be here with Fabrice and Daniel, two of the people whose knowledge and experiences so informed Bobbi's work and my own understanding of these issues. So thank you for your generosity with your time and expertise. It's really wonderful to be here with this audience, and I'm really looking forward to our listening session today. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much, Noi. We are so excited to have partnerships like this and to be able to try new things. You know, as the Gulf States Newsroom, we try new things. We try to find the best way to tell whatever story that we need to tell. And we're so excited to have this series of stories recognized by IRE, which is Investigative Reporters and Editors. It's one of the, kind of premier groups for investigative journalism. And our series came in as a finalist in the small audio category. And so it's a very competitive competition. So we were really excited to have it recognized in that way, and really proud that we're actually continuing that conversation. The stories came out in December, and here we are having this conversation again about these important issues. So the person behind this work is Bobbi-Jeanne Misick. She covers criminal justice and immigration for the Gulf States Newsroom and is based in New Orleans. I'm going to pass it over to Bobbi now to talk a little bit about the pieces before we get into our listening session. And just know that so much work went into these stories, over a year of research, of using habeas corpus petitions, data analysis, interviews with detainees, and former detainees. And Bobbi found a way to combine that data with powerful stories to shed light on this issue. And we're so excited to be able to have Bobbi set up these pieces so we can get to listening and then talk to some of the people, as Noi was just saying, who were part of this coverage and informed these stories about what's happening now. So Bobbi, if you'll come on over. Bobbi-Jeanne Misick.
Hey everybody, thank you for joining us. I will tell you a little bit about this story, so you get a better understanding. So Louisiana has the second largest population of detained immigrants in the country, next to Texas. It's always about half of that population. And I was really interested in the process here, and learned that, during the time of my investigation, typically folks that were seeking asylum would be sent to Mississippi first, and that's where they would get an initial interview called a credible fear screening, and then they would be sent oftentimes to Louisiana, which is where the immigration courts are located. But just to backtrack a little, there ended up being hundreds of people from Cameroon in Louisiana and Mississippi in those detention centers because of a large migration of immigrants from Cameroon that were coming to the United States to seek asylum, fleeing a brutal conflict in the English-speaking region of the country. And at least 200 of them were sent to Mississippi and Louisiana. And that just ended up being sort of a perfect storm, because at that time, the Louisiana was expanding its detention capacity under former President Donald Trump, and also a new wave of judges, immigration judges, who were quite conservative, were being put in place in that state. And so what I ended up finding in my investigation was that people from Cameroon who ended up in Louisiana courts between 2016 and 2021 just had higher barriers to asylum than if they had ended up in courts in other parts of the country. Judges in these courts rarely sided with asylum seekers of any kind, even when they had really strong claims to asylum, which I, through talking to experts and things like that, learned that Cameroonians did. I mean, they were fleeing conflict, they were claiming to be persecuted. And I collected hundreds of federal documents. That's what Priska was talking about with the habeas corpus documents from people that were living in detention in Louisiana. I just found out, through ancillary documents in there that, so many people were saying that they were afraid that their lives were in danger if they were to be deported and returned to Cameroon. I also found that between 2016 and 2021, when we saw the asylum grant rate at about 64% in the nation, in Louisiana courts, it was at just around 12. So just, cards stacked really high up against folks. And so in my piece, I like Priska said, intertwine the data with the personal experiences of the people that I was able to interview, to kind of show all the different ways that the immigration system in the Gulf states is really tangled up. And to sort of explain how we got to that moment, we're going to start this story off with, a brief history lesson. And so that's where we'll start today, and Priska will take it away.
Great. And before I press play on this audio, just want to say that we are going to be taking questions in the second half of this. This piece, when we listen to these three pieces, it's going to be about 16 minutes long to just inform that listening process for you. And we're also going to have some of the great illustrations that we had for this story by Taslim Van Huttem playing on the screen as well. So please submit your questions in the Q&A if things come up for you while you're listening. And then we are so excited to continue this discussion in a few minutes.
Cameroon has two parts, a French-speaking side and a much smaller English-speaking side. I interviewed Fabrice Bidpoua. He's a former college student who came to the U.S. to seek asylum. He says people from the French side of Cameroon had better lives.
In my country, just being able to speak French gives you an advantage over the other person in so many things.
Fabrice says that economic opportunities are more often built on the French side, so the system just seemed rigged against English speakers like him. The language divide came to a head in 2016. English-speaking Cameroonians, particularly lawyers and teachers, began to hold peaceful protests against the heavy influence of French.
Anglophones should be given the right to manage their own affairs.
And the government responded with violence.
The military hijacking the demonstrations, tear gassing them, shooting, flogging.
And according to Fabrice, that former student, when government security forces started shooting people, some people fought back.
It was just pointless for them to sit and die without, you gotta fight before you die. You don't just
The government's clamp down on protests silences the more moderate voices in the movement, making room for more radical voices, people who want English-speaking Cameroon to be its own country. These people, identified as separatists, take up arms against government forces, and as the fight goes on, you start seeing human rights abuses on both sides. And by 2018, Fabrice and other students went out to protest. He says they carried plants and green fabrics to show the government that they came in peace. That's when he started getting arrested. He says he was arrested 3 times, and the 3rd time, police were transporting him and others at night, and the separatists attacked. But he escaped, and the way he described his escape from the police truck, it's like a movie. When the driver tries to pull over, Fabrice jumps out of the vehicle and rolls down a steep valley. He hits his head and gets banged up a bit, and mind you, he's still handcuffed. But he jumps back up.
And I started running. I didn't even know the direction I was running to because it was dark. So I'm just running in the bush, going and going and going.
Fabrice was eventually able to leave. His mother paid for his travel out of the country. I spent a lot of time with a man we're calling BJ. We're using a pseudonym because he fears for his family's safety in Cameroon. When BJ left Cameroon, he insisted that he wasn't planning on going to the US.
I didn't know where I was going. It's just that I was just looking for a place that I can be safe.
But when he arrived in the U.S. in 2019, he says he was locked in detention for nearly a year and a half with a looming final order of deportation.
For me to go back home, I know that I'm going to die.
The first thing that went wrong for him was he failed his credible fear interview. This interview is generally the first step before immigrants can even apply for asylum. For BJ and others I spoke with who were in detention, this was a phone call, with an asylum officer on the other end of the line trying to understand why they fled.
So can you walk me through that?
I asked him to walk me through it. Why exactly he's afraid to go back to Cameroon.
Through that because that was a very, very painful experience, and I can never forget it. It started with my elder sister.
First, he says separatists kidnapped his sister.
I got the news.
They're seeking independence for English-speaking Cameroon. Most of the country operates in French.
I'm really pleading with them to release my elder sister.
BJ says he talked those separatists into letting his sister go, and he took her home.
She was so happy.
But then, Cameroon's military police arrested him on suspicion of being a separatist himself.
They beat me every day, every morning.
BJ says after a few days in jail, an officer helped him escape. He ran home to his wife that same night. His 2 daughters and infant son were sleeping at the time, and he didn't wake them. He just leaves and goes into hiding in another part of the country. But the police came looking for him, so he left the country.
And that's a risky journey to take from Africa to this place.
BJ says when he was telling the asylum officer this story, some things were lost in translation. The English he spoke in Cameroon was different from how the asylum officer spoke.
So there were some things that he will ask me and I will not even understand.
Sometime after the interview, he got a document saying that he had a negative credible fear determination. That means the asylum officer didn't find his story believable or didn't think that he could qualify for asylum. See, with the credible fear interview, asylum officers are looking to answer a few questions.
Is there sort of a possible legal basis for their asylum claim? Does it seem like there's a reason that you fear being returned?
That's Mary Yannick, director of Tulane University's Immigrants' Rights Law Clinic.
It's supposed to be a fairly low bar.
But when BJ gets his paperwork back from that interview, he learns that he somehow didn't meet that low bar. At first, he was reassured by other people in the detention center.
They say, oh, don't worry about that. When you go in front of the judge, you can express yourself.
He could explain his story to an immigration judge in person. And BJ held on to this idea that he'd get the chance for an immigration judge to review that decision and even overturn it. His case ended up on Judge Brent Landis's desk. This time, people in his facility weren't as reassuring.
So they were like, oh, my brother, if you're going to meet Judge Landis, just know that you're going to have negative.
Landis is part of a group of judges appointed to Louisiana immigration courts during the Trump administration. They rarely sided with asylum seekers in recent years. When Landis was on the bench in Louisiana, he granted asylum in under 5% of the cases that he saw. So on the day BJ met with Landis, things didn't go well. First of all, it was via video, not in person, and BJ says Landis just asked him his name, birth date, when he left Cameroon, and when he entered the U.S. And then Landis called it. He agreed with the asylum officer that BJ isn't eligible to apply for protection, and that means he could be deported.
So when I was like, please, Your Honor, I would like, he said, be quiet. You only speak when I ask you to.
BJ says he tried to speak anyway, and Landis spun his chair around.
And telling the secretary to bring in the next person.
After hearing this from BJ, our investigative team looked at credible fear reviews by judges in Louisiana's immigration courts, and we found that they overwhelmingly upheld the original negative credible fear determinations, like the one BJ got. Nationally, judges upheld more than 70% of all credible fear determinations they reviewed between October of 2017 and August of 2021. In Louisiana, it was more than 90%. Landis's rate was nearly 100, which meant almost everyone he reviewed could not apply for asylum. BJ thinks this is not how people fleeing conflict should be treated.
No one will ever think of traveling from Africa coming to America just to come have good life. Just know that he's running away from something. And they need to protect the person. They don't need to send him back.
The way he sees it, he was running for his life, asked for protection, and instead got caught up in this web of an immigration system in the Gulf South, where judges almost never side with immigrants. And even people from countries that are clearly in crisis can be stuck in detention under threat of deportation for years. From the moment he went on the run, fleeing military police in Cameroon, BJ has been searching for safety. When he arrived in the U.S. in 2019, he thought he'd found it when he was allowed to cross the border.
Going inside with tears, knowing that I'm going to be safe.
We're using a pseudonym because he fears for his family's safety. For nearly a year and a half, BJ was stuck behind bars, inside detention centers in Mississippi and Louisiana, not knowing if or when he'd be sent back. And it's not easy to get out. The Immigration and Customs Enforcement Office that manages the region denied almost every parole request it received in 2018 and 2019.
They were not releasing people, so we're just there.
Just there, in an area where the majority of detention centers are run by for-profit private prison companies.
They treat immigrants like worse than prisoners.
That's Fabrice Bidpua. He was a student in Cameroon before he fled to the U.S. He's talking about Pine Prairie Ice Processing Center in Louisiana, where he was held for more than a year and a half. He says the dorm where he and other Black immigrants slept was crowded and that sometimes they'd be left in a dorm room without AC.
Water all over the floor from sweat. We need to keep cleaning over and over like 6 times a day.
Some were detained for so long that they filed federal petitions for relief. Basically, a last resort to get released from punitive, indefinite detention. Type Investigations and the Gulf States Newsroom analyzed those petitions and found that most of the Cameroonians who filed had been detained for more than a year. One man was held for more than 3 years. In Pine Prairie, Bidpua and other Africans, mostly from Cameroon, staged a hunger strike. They were fed up with what they saw as racist treatment, poor conditions, and sweeping parole denials. The facility's parent company, Geo Group, said they, quote, strongly rejected these allegations. Across the state line at Adams County Correctional Center in Mississippi, BJ had been refusing to sign or fingerprint his deportation documents. He says he thought that would keep him from being sent back to Cameroon. Detention seemed safer than going home.
I preferred to stay at Adams, even for the rest of my life, because I know what will happen if I go back over there to Cameroon. I'm going to die either.
Then, in September of 2020, he says officers used force against him. According to a complaint from immigrants' rights groups filed with the Department of Homeland Security, staff at Adams allegedly used pepper spray and excessive force, including chokeholds, to pressure BJ and several other Cameroonians to fingerprint or sign their deportation documents.
I was so confused because, I didn't commit any crime. I was just like I don't want to use my fingerprint because I don't want to go back. That was all.
A representative from Core Civic, the detention center's parent company, denied some allegations made in the complaint, but not the use of force. The company alleges that 3 detainees assaulted staff members and had to be subdued. Both BJ and Bidpua spent roughly a year and a half in detention, with no idea of when they would be deported or released. They got out after Biden took office and pushed for the release of low-threat detainees. Bidpua is in Maryland. He's studying database administration. BJ is in Texas. He's working as a carpenter. And this spring, they got another glimmer of hope.
Hi.
Hey, Bobby. Look at I'm going crazy already, Bobby.
On this morning, April 15th, the Biden administration announced it was granting temporary protected status to Cameroonians in the U.S.
Today is the happiest day in my life.
After years of legal limbo, TPS was a formal recognition that the ongoing armed conflict and humanitarian crisis in Cameroon made it too dangerous for many to return home.
An estimated 40,000 Cameroonians are eligible to apply for the relief.
It's big news. TPS allows them to work and live here without any threat of deportation for at least 18 months. Bidpua says he's grateful to the U.S. government for granting Cameroonians temporary protected status, but it is just temporary. And after it's lifted...
Where am I going to? Who do I know? I cannot go back to my country.
And that temporary protection does not offer a separate path to citizenship. So the good news is bittersweet for BJ and his family. There's still no legal way for BJ to apply for them to join him in the U.S. But when he told his wife about it...
She was so happy. And then she started crying. I talked to her and the kids too. My boy, he's always like, Daddy, when are you coming to take me? Each time he asks me that question, I feel so bad.
Which question?
Daddy, when are you coming to take me?
He's happy to be safe and alive in the U.S. Free from detention with temporary protection, he now has a new focus: being there for his wife and kids. That means his journey isn't over. For the Gulf States Newsroom and Type Investigations, I'm Bobbi-Jeanne Misick.
Well, I've listened to that a lot, but still very moving, especially that part at the end. Thanks everyone for being here and listening. Thank you for your patience during our earlier technical difficulties. We're really glad to be able to share those stories with you again, kind of all at once. And we now want to have a conversation answering any questions that you may have, but also expanding the conversation to talk a little bit more about all that's happened since those stories came out in December. So I will now bring back our guests. Bobby, if you want to turn your camera back on, and Priska as well. Very happy to have Bobbi-Jeanne Misick back with us, as you heard her earlier, and to also have Priska Bidpua, who I heard his voice so much, and it was great to see your face and to meet you again. And also Daniel Tse. And Daniel, I want to start with you just to introduce yourself and talk about the work that you are doing in terms of advocacy for Cameroonians and your greater work in immigrant rights.
Thank you so much, Priska and Bobby, for the amazing work. And greetings to everybody. Hi to all the attendees and the co-panelists as well. My name is Daniel Tse. I am a joint legal fellow at Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights and the Haitian Bridge Alliance. In addition to that, I am the founder of the Cameroon Advocacy Network, and I also direct the Black Immigrants Bill Fund. So I do wear a lot of hats depending on the situation. But my work, since again my own personal experience through detention, just like Fabrice and many other Cameroonian community members, has just developed over the year, and it continues to be a strong passion of mine to stand in the front line, dedicated to advocate for not just for Cameroonians, not just for Black migrants, but for all immigrants in general, right? To continue to push the narrative about welcoming people with dignity, about making sure that people are treated equally. We try to break down this idea of double standard treatment, but the idea that migration or immigration is a human right. Asylum seekers deserve the right to be protected. And so over the past years, or through the Cameroon Advocacy Network, myself and Fabrice and other very, very strong and committed advocates, Cameroonian advocates, affected individuals like myself, through the Cameroon Advocacy Network, under the leadership of Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights, Haitian Bridge Alliance, a couple of other organizations that have been supporting this movement. We've been able to, establish some groundbreaking work, like you mentioned, about securing temporary protected status for Cameroonians. In addition to that, providing a lot of legal representation for those who are in detention and post-release assistance for those who have been released. Through the Black Immigrants Bill Fund, we're able to provide, bond assistance for thousands of Black immigrants who have been released from detention. And it's just great that we continue to do this work with passion, even though we've been somehow affected by this system. That's just a little bit about me, and I'll pass it back to you, Priska.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And Fabrice, would love for you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about, what you have been up to in the months since we heard that, but also just what your life has been like, after your experience with detention.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Fabrice Before. I'm from Cameroon. Right now I'm actually a database administrator, and I'm a community organizer with Cameroon Advocacy Network. Daniel is my boss. And of course, I've been through a lot with the immigration system. So much injustice. And having been through all that I've been through in this country, spending over 18 months in detention under those harsh conditions, it has not been easy, but I would say it taught me a lot, because it made me, have developed that much skills in fighting for what's right, for the immigrants and my people as well. So I've been fighting ever since I was in detention when I got out, and I was blessed to meet some few people that are so important in my life, like Daniel and Marie and many more others. I feel like there is a lot that I should say, but if I keep talking, I might take, the whole day.
Well, we'll get in.
It's everything that has been happening is just, running through my mind at this point. I'm just trying to recall a lot of things that I've been through and trying to relate it with the present condition and what what I'm hoping to see in the future. It's quite difficult, but I would say TPS is a hope for everyone in such situation right now.
So temporary protected status, we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a bit, and kind of what's changed in the options for asylum seekers right now. But first, I just wanted to ask you, Fabrice, what was it like listening to that? We do a lot of work as journalists, and don't always get the chance to watch someone listen to what we did. So I just wonder what it was like for you to hear that.
Well, it is something that I would say it's so important to me and to many of us, not just me, because having to meet a team like you all that help to push forward, to expose what's happening in detention. I mean, especially to Black migrants, it's so important for me. And I feel like I feel so much hope that this will help. I mean, not just to push forward, but to help everyone in my situation to build them emotionally and know that there are people out there that care about them and ready to push forward to expose what they've been through, and which will go a long way to help those that are to come and those that are still in detention. So it is very important to me, and I like that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing your story, and also again for being here. Bobbi, I want to just kind of back up a little bit and talk about, how you started reporting on this issue in the first place. And in that, I'm going to fold in a question that we got in the Q&A. Remember, you can submit your questions there. But talk a little bit more about, why Louisiana had such a delay, and, and why these experiences existed, particularly for Black asylum seekers. What all was happening in terms of that perfect storm, and how did you start reporting on it?
Okay, well, the way that I started reporting on it was I arrived in Louisiana during the pandemic, and right away learned about the hunger strike that Fabrice was a part of, and I wasn't reporting on immigration at the time, but I learned about it, and I learned that it was spearheaded by a group of African immigrants who were mostly from Cameroon. And so then I started learning that there were a large number of Cameroonians detained in the region. And then once I started working as a reporter again, I found out about the abuses that folks had claimed they experienced with being forced to sign their deportation documents, particularly the instance that happened at Adams County Correctional Center. And I was trying to understand why these things were happening, why people were being held in detention for so long. Because when that happened, just by knowing their histories or whatever, Fabrice and BJ, I knew that they both had entered the US around the same time. And so when that abuse was happening with BJ in detention, Fabrice was also still in detention fighting against, conditions of confinement. And so that's kind of what sparked me. And then I wanted to understand, once I found out about the negative credible fear determinations, I wanted to understand why this was happening so much to people who seem to have really good claims to asylum. And then once we got to the judge portion, I wanted to understand how those judge hearings were going, because all I was hearing was that, you spend 3 minutes before a judge and they decide your fate. So I want to go to the other question though, about Louisiana.
Yeah, kind of what was going on that was, leading to these.
I think it's just a lot of, I think that oftentimes the systems are designed to slow things down, and but I can't speak to each agency, and I can't say like, yes, this is definitely by design. But I think what was happening was you have the Houston Asylum Office, which is the office that is interviewing a lot of people that are detained in the New Orleans ICE field office, giving them their credible fear interviews. And so you start off with an office that is has been complained about for applying a higher standard than is legal to these credible fear interviews. So you start off with people getting negative credible fear interviews, and then you move on to the court where, you know, the judges are just not, even if that negative credible fear determination was a mistake because of that higher standard applied, the judges are not paying attention to that. They are just siding with the asylum officer without really giving much energy to the person standing in front of them.
Yeah. Throughout, you know, when you first were telling me about these issues, and, you know, I lived in California for 7 years before coming to this region, and I really hadn't thought of immigration as being something that would be, you know, and detention as being such a big issue here. So that was really eye-opening. And, you know, there's so many of these terms, negative, credible, you know, there's so many of these terms, but, you know, really it's someone coming before a judge or, you know, an officer telling their story and having someone kind of decide what happens to them.
In BJ's case, not getting to tell the judge their story at all.
Not getting to tell the story. Yeah. What are you hearing? I want to talk about kind of a couple of things that have changed in terms of the temporary protected status and, you know, what the options are now, but also just want to go back and talk a little bit more about the situation in Cameroon. You know, we started those pieces looking at, you know, the conflict and what really set off, you know, in 2017, a wave of you know, people leaving that country. What are we hearing about what's going on now, Daniel?
Thank you, Priska. Honestly, things have really gotten worse. You know, and one very sad thing to note about this issue is that there's not just coverage of what's happening on the ground, right? In the early days of this crisis, there was the most famous internet shutdown as a strategy by the government to hide information from going out. And there was no international reporting. Even local reporters who were trying to expose some of these happenings were all, you know, silenced, either by, you know, abducting them or them being kidnapped or them just disappearing in thin air. And this is something that's been going on for a while now in the country. I think most recently, if we've all been current with the situation happening in Cameroon, there's a very, very famous affair, as they say in French, going now about a journalist who was speaking up against the corruptions in the system and things that happen in the country. And, you know, we saw how that journalist was executed in cold blood. You know, that's just one example of the things that are happening in Cameroon on the ground that are not being put out to the wall. And so, but what's happening on the ground in Cameroon, we see that up to date, schools are not still operational in the Northwest and Southwest regions. This is almost 4 or 5 years of non-schooling of kids in this region. Just think about it. Think about the impact. A whole generation, right, has not been able to go to school for 5 years. What's going to become of these kids? We still see reports that come out of the region of, you know, arbitrary arrest and killings and you know, gun violence between state armed groups and non-state armed groups, and then innocent civilians are caught into this mess, right, and end up losing their lives. We see how young men, most of us who are fleeing the violence in Cameroon, are being targeted by the government or by these non-state armed groups. The government target them to be part of the non-state armed groups, and the non-state armed groups are targeting them to be part of the non-state armed groups to fight against the government, against what's happening, as we all heard in the clip earlier. So in addition to that, we just see that there is no positive response at all from the government. a couple of years ago, we heard about the very infamous dialogue about how people were staged to come talk about resolving the issue, but that never really happened. We've seen, and what curious me actually is that we've seen various reports, right, by the State Department actually, highlighting the issues that are happening in Cameroon. This was very, very significant when we're doing the fight, the push for TPS for Cameroon. The United States government actually recognizes, right, in addition to them encouraging the issue, either by some arms they provided or whatever way they've encouraged this issue in the background. Their reports do show that it provides an overview of the situation in Cameroon, and it covered issues such as arbitrary arrests, unlawful killings, torture, arbitrary detention, killing of journalists, restriction of freedom of expression and freedom of movement. There's the very famous Ghost Town Mondays. People are unable to move. Kids are unable to go to school in school uniform because of the fear of being identified. So it's just a lot of issues that have been happening across years, and there are several reports out there that highlights this issue. And like I said, these issues have only gotten worse, and we don't hear or see of these issues because of not adequate or enough reporting by the international community. And that's why this is a very important piece. Again, thanks again, Bobbi, for throwing more highlight to this issue. The intersection from what actually happens on the ground and these individuals who have fled violence, coming to seek safety in the United States and then being treated as such. Right. Last year, we collaborated with Human Rights Watch to release a report around the time when TPS was designated. And this report was titled, "How Can You Throw Us Back?" Right. It specifically highlighted the situation of, I think, people who were detained in the same facility with Fabrice and other individuals who were detained in those different facilities in the Louisiana area and Texas area, basically across the country, how they were screaming and crying for their lives and begging that they prefer to stay in detention. And or they prefer to stay in detention than to be deported back to Cameroon. So you can imagine who doesn't love freedom. So if I prefer to stay in the jail cell other than being deported back to my home country, you can imagine how dangerous this situation could be, right? And so this was the same ask we made to the government, say, hey, don't deport these people back to Cameroon because of these conditions that are going on now. But at the end of the day, United States government deported over 100, and I think 40, 50 Cameroonians that we could keep track of. We heard that there were several
every day. Every day 45.
No, there were about 3 deportation flights that we could keep track of, right? Because the government is going to tell us about these deportation flights, but we could keep track of about 3, almost 4 deportation flights that left to Cameroon, and some people were being deported on commercial flights. We only heard from them after they arrived in Cameroon, and they contacted us about how they were being detained in Cameroon. But the majority of the Cameroonians who were deported back to Cameroon, which we are still in contact with some of them, but some of them we cannot account for, right? And that report by Human Rights Watch, How Can You Throw Us Back, specifically highlights cases of abuses and torture and detention and that happened to these Cameroonians once they were deported back to Cameroon. And again, I said, some of these are Cameroonians, we can't even account for them. We don't know if they're still alive. Some of them are probably still in detention. So like I said, the situation in Cameroon just gotten from bad to worst. And the same issues that were happening 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago of arbitrary killing, arrest and detention and adoption and, military confrontation with non-state armed groups is still happening at a larger scale. In the local communities, villages are still being burnt down. I mentioned the example of the journalist who was silenced because he was speaking up against the corruption in the country. All of these issues are still happening. So yeah, that's just conditions have not changed.
Hearing that of years without school, I mean, that's just wow. That's just really can't imagine that. Someone asked a question, and maybe putting you all on the spot with a percentage there, but it was mentioned in the piece that over 70% of asylum seekers nationwide are rejected. Is that all asylum seekers, or just those for the continent of Africa?
Yeah, I can answer this question. Again, it is 70% of asylum seekers from Black asylum seekers, if I should say so. It's an outright double standard operation in the immigration system where, based on the color of your skin or the region of the world where you come from, your credibility is certainly put at a higher standard, right? And so it cuts across from credible fear findings to immigration court decisions that grant asylum, to bond hearings or parole determination, to folks being, paroled in the country as well. We see that Black immigrants are being held at a higher standard and, of course, face a higher percentage of denial rate to their asylum claims, their credible fears hearings, and bond issuing as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that might have referred to the more than 70% of the credible fear reviews by the judges that asylum seekers were. And so that was nationwide. That was for immigrants from all over the world, if it's that reference. But what we found was in Louisiana, that number was even higher. The judges were denying more than 90% of the credible fear reviews they were agreeing with the asylum officer with more than 90% of the negative credible fear reviews that came in front of them. And I think at least with the judge that BJ went in front of, when we looked into it, he had never sided with a Cameroonian. I mean, it was a small number of Cameroonians that went before him that we could see, but for that small number, he had never turned a credible fear negative to positive. He'd always sided with the asylum officer.
We have a question. What laws govern credible fear interviews? Is there a way to modify the way that they're done? What policy change could change the process?
So credible fear interviews are interviews that are conducted to determine whether an individual has who has entered the United States has a credible fear of persecution or torture from their home country to return. And the legal basis for credible fear interview, it's found in the Immigration Laws of the United States. But I must say that it is of the Immigration Nationality Act, but I must say that it's basically based on the discretion of the person of the asylum officer that's interviewing you, right? Whether that person believes you or not. And so because of the outright anti-immigrant policies or double standard, how people treat immigrants, it's therefore likely that most of these folks are going to be denied credible fear interview, or given a negative determination.
Yeah. Bobby, any other thoughts on that? Like how the process could be changed so that it wouldn't be, unevenly impacting people from certain countries?
I'm not entirely sure how it could change. Like Daniel said, it does seem to be up to the asylum officer. I mean, we know of cases where people with very similar, almost identical experiences will go to two different asylum officers in the Houston Asylum Office and have one will have positive and one will have negative. And I think, and maybe Daniel can update me on this because I haven't checked the news on this in a while, but what the Biden administration did was to allow asylum officers in some instances to also, oversee folks' asylum applications instead of having that go through the courts because of backups in the court. And so I think that while that, has the ability to allow for people to get through the process a little faster than what we've seen, I wonder about sort of leaving so much up to the discretion of asylum officers. But I don't know how it would change. The credible fear interview is supposed to be a low threshold interview to see if you are eligible to apply for asylum. And so I think what is happening with some asylum officers is they are not applying that low threshold. And then, which we might talk about a little bit later, what's happened also with the asylum ban, it makes it more difficult for for you to be eligible for asylum. Therefore, that asylum officer might take it upon themselves to say, okay, well, this person did not apply for asylum in another country, for example, so therefore they don't have, even if they have nexus, they don't have credible fear.
Yeah, I can speak more to that again. Not to take up too much space, but the asylum officer must first of all follow certain procedures and guidelines as stated by the Immigration Nationality Act, and again based on his discretion to determine whether this individual is credible or not. However, just like some of the issues that we're noticing, especially in the Louisiana area, right? The officer must provide the individual who he's been interviewed a very clear explanation of the purpose and nature of the interview, ensuring that this individual understands the questions and communicate effectively about what he or she is asking this individual, for the individual to understand, hey, this is to determine, why you are fleeing your country. But most of the time, because of, again, language barriers, again, the discrimination by these officers want to really make these interviews go through ineffectively. Most of the time conducting these interviews over the phone, in a noisy environment or in a private space, just to name a few factors, right? All these factors contribute to why people end up with negative credible findings because of the ineffective nature of how these interviews are being conducted, right? As noticed, especially in the Louisiana area.
So, we're talking about kind of so many different problems in this system, right? The actual intake system, the process of verifying the danger, and then, once things get handed off to a judge, and then also the issues in detention itself, and the dangers there. Temporary protected status, when we talk about that, this is something that it was just a year ago this week that was granted for Cameroonian asylum seekers. Let's talk a little bit, Bobbi, just tell us exactly what that is and how it works.
Sure. So temporary protected status is just that. I saw one of the questions was, is it a path to asylum? It is not. But we've seen in the case of folks from Haiti and also from Venezuela that it does often get extended. I wouldn't be able to speak to the likelihood that it will be extended for Cameroonians, but maybe Daniel can. And so this one is 18 months long, and it is when the United States recognizes that the country conditions are in such a state that if they were to send like citizens of that country back, that they would be in great danger. And so it's to give them temporary protection until the situation calms down, which, could take years or decades, as we've seen in other countries. Those country conditions have most often escalated or gotten worse over time. So yeah, I'm not sure what the future holds for TPS for Cameroon, but Daniel, I don't know if you have a little bit more perspective for.
Well, I just wanted to bring Priska in. What has TPS meant for you?
TPS, it's like I would say it's life saving at the moment because it is temporary. At a point of like same time last year, we felt so much relieved and like everything is going well. We feel like we have another 18 months to leave, and here we are again, and now we are still thinking if we'll be able to still have that other 18 another 18 months. So I would say it has helped me a lot, but like I said before, it has a shortcoming, which comes with a lot. I mean, like it helps a lot, but there are a lot of people too that are still going through the same problem. Maybe Daniel might want to talk about that later on, but we have this problem of USCIS bad law, something like that, that people have been applying and applying and applying. I mean, one of the first people that applied for TPS, right on to date, they don't have it. And we still have people in detention. You know, still have Cameroonians in detention pending these TPS applications. So the officers have decided to keep them in detention and only release them once their TPS has been granted. And so when we see cases like that, it doesn't sound well to us. I mean, to me personally, and most of those that are going through that, I've been fortunate that mine came out, I mean, as quickly as possible, but there are a lot, I mean, thousands upon thousands of people who applied even before me that haven't gotten it. And so they are still unable to work. They are still unable to drive. They are still unable to go to school. They have no social securities. They cannot have identification cards. And now we are moving towards the end of the temporary protective status that was designated. Then we still have thousands of Cameroonians that are in the country that are not eligible, and there are more that are coming. So I keep being worried about all of these, despite the fact that I'm fortunate to have one, because I'm a man that I've always been looking into my brothers and sisters' situations like mine. I feel sorry for them, and I feel like their life is more at risk than mine, which is so discouraging to me that the government is still unable to put in policies in place that will help facilitate these applications and save these people's life. And of course, their families back home, because they are here, they need to take care, they need to protect their families back home, which entails like maybe moving them from the troubled regions, maybe to somewhere safer. And all of this requires financial assistance, which they cannot get. Why they don't have TPS and work authorizations to do that. And so they're worried about themselves here, and again, coupled with the depression, like you stay or every day you are home. I mean, just imagine for more than years upon years that they are here, they don't have no documents to work, they stay at home. And this brings a lot of troubles in their minds, and they tend to be depressed. And it is not good for their health and not good for the health of their families back home. So at a very broad way, TPS is very important. But what I am fighting for, what I really want to happen or want to see this government do, is put policies in place that will facilitate these applications, and of course, consider redesignating TPS for Cameroon, not extending it, because there are a lot of Cameroonians that have came in after that, and they're not eligible. So
okay, yeah, so not just making it longer than the 18 months, but redesignate it so that others who have come since could be eligible too. I can't imagine that just suspense, like in your life and in the life of so many people in your community, just not knowing. Bobby, I'm not sure the last time you've talked to BJ, but do you know how he's doing and kind of what his situation is with TPS?
The last time we spoke, his application was still pending, but also he, after many different attempts for a new interview with the Houston Asylum Office, was granted one. And so we haven't spoken since then, so I don't know what the status of that is. But outside of that, he's moving forward, building a life in the U.S. because for him, there's not really another option. He's got to hold out hope that he can eventually bring his family to safety in the U.S.
Yeah. Daniel, was there anything else that you wanted to add about TPS?
Sure. We just want to put out, the call right now. And here's me putting on my advocate hat, right? We need to all stand up and start considering how we're going to show up and hold this government accountable for, again, not just the treatment or mistreatment of asylum seekers in detention, it's most especially the Louisiana areas. Speaking of that, we have several complaints pending that have never been resolved, but this is me saying that the government should start thinking about redesignating and extending TPS for Cameroon, right? I wanted to flag something real quick here. We should all understand that it is not because the United States government cannot redesignate TPS for Cameroon immediately, or why it took it so long for it to designate it originally. It's just a lack of will, right? We saw how there were special processes that were created for other countries, and thousands of them were being processed, and their work permits and TPS applications of special status, as they call it, were being processed as quickly as possible. And these individuals were all established in less than no time, right? At the same time, we had several Black migrants who were rotting in detention. We had people who were being turned down and whipped like slaves at the border. And this is showing that the system just lacks the will to do it, not the capacity to do it. So TPS has, of course, helped a lot of Cameroonians and to offer them this temporary relief, this temporary protection. However, these people are still in limbo. I remember when at the time we were working with TPS, we had several community members of the Cameroon Advocacy Network who could not even leave their houses because of the fear of encountering officers. And so Fabrice was just expressing that this is a relief, but it's temporary. Now, after 18 months, you've applied for it when it was issued, you have not still gotten your document, and now you're still living in fear. Oh my God, what's going to happen now? So backlog is really a big issue, because even though people were able to apply from the start, they've not still benefited. So that's one thing that we should really focus on during our call for a redesignation and extension. Fabrice mentioned individuals who are in detention. I have 2 cases right now out of Texas who are eligible for TPS, but these individuals are still being held in detention. How terrible is it? Like, how determined are these ICE officers to deport back this person, right? When the government has actually issued, hey, country conditions are not safe. Any Cameroonian individuals who was here before this particular date should be granted protection and released. However, this guy is still being detained, right? How can we explain that, right? Apart from the outright, ASRA system that is meant to break the black body and continue to incarcerate and punish people. So that's what I say.
Well, thank you everyone for these great questions. This is where we were planning to end, but due to our at 8:30 Central, but since we had a little our technical difficulties getting started, I'd like to take a few more questions, and thank you again to everyone so much for being here. Can we talk a little bit more about the conditions in detention centers? Has what if anything has changed since those cases that we were looking at a couple of years ago? I know, Bobbi, just a couple of weeks ago, we were doing stories about hunger strikes and about other abuses and claims that had been filed. What do we know about what's happening now? Whoever wants to chime in.
I can start and someone else can go. Daniel visits the detention centers fairly regularly. So I can only speak to the ones in the New Orleans ICE field office region. And to my understanding, not much has changed. There has been an investigation by DHS into the field office itself, into some of these facilities. There have been recommendations about these facilities, including a reduction of population size, I guess changes are made for a little while, and then the population goes back up. For example, there was a recommendation to reduce the population at Wynn Correctional Center, which was a former private prison, fairly infamous after a Mother Jones article was written about it, that now houses immigrants, and it is, it reduces population for a while, but I just looked on Track Immigration, which is a resource then, and it said that it's got the third highest population of all, of detained immigrant population in the country. So it's after two pretty large detention centers in Texas. It's the third most populous detention center. So yeah, I don't know that much has changed, especially because the complaints that we see coming out of the detention centers show that people are still experiencing, issues with hygiene, access to proper hygiene products, access to appropriate medical care, and access to information about their own cases.
Daniel, anything to add there?
Yeah, sure. My work at these various platforms that I am on, Haitian Beach Alliance, Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights, Camara Advocacy Network, the Black Immigrants Bay Fund, cuts across with the various detention visits that I conduct. We have monthly visits to the NORA area, across California area, as well to other parts of the country, where we go firsthand into these facilities to provide know your rights information to the detainees. However, we also conduct interviews to determine, right, what are the current conditions that these individuals face in these facilities.
And I was just going to add that just I don't know what time is, but recently Bobbi did a piece about the Know Your Rights campaign, and kind of, advocates like you are some of the very few people who are able to go in and actually talk to people who are detained, observe the conditions yourself, but also know your rights, educate them to make sure that they know, that they're aware of the processes and all of the legal, this tangled web that we've been talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Bobbi can share more about her recent reporting out of Louisiana with the medical neglect and the issues that happened in these facilities. However, these issues could be broken down into various sectors, right? We have legal issues, we have human rights violations, and we have medical neglect, we have discriminatory practices or abusive and discriminatory practices. And so legal issues cut across, like what this piece was talking about: massive parole denials, massive credible fear denials, and again, higher percentage of asylum deniers, again, more specific to Black immigrants, right? Credible fear interview process, it is not a fair process because of lack of confidentiality. The information is being, or the interview is being conducted in an open space. It's noisy, it's not confidential. The over the phone, there's no clear communication or understanding between the interview and the interviewee. We see that all of this, including language and again, the high credibility standards set by these individuals based on their discretion when they're conducting these interviews, tends to provide negative credible fear findings, right? We go into issues like medical neglect, right? We have a situation out of still a facility in Atlanta where Cameroonian women will be sterilized with their consent. We have, like Fabrice mentioned, poor medical attention in these facilities. I think Bobbi recently reported how a man named Daniel Cortez, out of one of the facilities in Louisiana, was outrightly neglected medically when he had issues and medical issues. And these are just the things that we can report of, right? In the past couple of years, we've even seen situations where people have died in these facilities because of this medical neglect. A Cameroonian man died a couple of years ago. There are several reports, right, that have shown that detention neglect and medical neglect in detention facilities have caused the death of so many individuals. Again, even post-detention, right, mental health issues, people are likely to commit suicide because of the effects of detention based on their mental health. And so all of these issues, again, in addition with discriminatory or abusive statements and mistreatment by asylum or deportation officers or detention officers, it's just a tip of the iceberg of the conditions of these facilities.
We have a question. Were detainees who were more proactive in organizing demonstrations to advocate, or, maybe doing some of the things that you told them about on the Know Your Rights tour, were they put on a faster track for either, I guess, release or deportation, depending, yeah.
This is retaliation, right? I think Bobby can speak more to this, but I'm just going to chime in really quick, right? Not just in Louisiana, I think across the country, we call this ICE retaliation, where individuals who, they know they're trying to pluck the head of the snake, right? They know that somebody who is able to recognize these issues, able to speak up about these issues. They say, hey, this person is going to expose our wrongdoing. So they're going to try to fast track to support this person, or to either lock up this person in solitary confinement, so the person is able to communicate or speak to other people. We see situation where this person is being isolated or being rotated from one facility to another. I have an individual who was deported back to Cameroon who spent a week traveling from one part of the country to another, just as a strategy to stop him from talking or exposing the injustice to us and both to the CRCL office, the Civil Rights and Civil Complaints office, about the issues that happen in these facilities. So it's a retaliation strategy by ICE or by the immigration system to hide these individuals from exposing the injustices in the system. So yes, individuals who are speaking up, who are more advocates, likely are often silenced.
Yeah. Bobby, for you as a reporter, looking at issues of criminal justice, immigration, race equity overall throughout the region, how is doing this reporting in this big project, being immersed in this content for over a year, how has it changed kind of how you think about your reporting, other stories that you may want to do?
I just think that, I think that I have always, for a long time, wanted to focus on immigration detention, and sort of came at it from a criminal justice reporting background, and was interested in the intersection of criminal justice and the immigration system, and I still am. I think that what I took away from this reporting is that it's just a stronger commitment to telling these stories, particularly in this region, because it's just so under-resourced in terms of, it's away from the border, so it's away from the resources that larger border states have for immigrants, and there's a lot that can happen. The system is so opaque that there's so much that can happen without folks' knowledge, and so to be, a thorn in the side of the local branches of these agencies, so that we, the public, know what's going on, because that's our right. That's kind of, all I want to do now.
Yeah. Daniel, some folks here tonight may be kind of immersed in this world. Some may be learning about these issues for the first time. What would you want, folks to take away from this, to remember about this issue for the Cameroonian community, but also, overall, maybe?
Sure. I'm going to pass out, a couple of key message points. First of all, speaking to my Cameroonian brothers and sisters who are listening or are going to watch this. I see some of them on the call. This is a time for you to stand up and fight back, as we say. Come and be the frontline advocate that you are. Think about the situation that's back home. Think about the situation that you're facing, or that you face in detention. And we're calling out individuals to join the Cameroon Advocacy Network. We have a membership. Again, there's no commitment as to financial anything. It's just a membership platform where you can get in, connect with the community, connect with the platform to get help, to get assistance, to get community support as we stand together as one. So later I'm going to drop the link in the chat, or you can go to our website at CameroonAdvocacyNetwork.org to fill out the engagement form and connect with us. We have a monthly meeting. It happens in the DMV area and the Bay Area chapter and the Chicago chapter every month, right? And I'm speaking to my journalist brothers and sisters who are on this call, or people, reporters and individual researchers, right? This is time to speak about the issue, right? in the past couple of years, I've really noticed a very, very interesting trend in the reporting system, the journalism world, how some issues are more important than others, right? Some killings that happen in the world are more important than others. We all saw it outrightly when Ukraine happened. Every other issue in the world was silenced, right? Again, don't get me wrong. It is not that the lives that happen are dying in Ukraine are less important, right?
It's that double standard that you're talking about. Yeah.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. So the same killings that are happening in Cameroon, are happening in Ethiopia, as we speak right now, in Mauritania, in Congo, in Niger, and these are all countries that we are fighting for TPS of Cameroon. So again, I'm going to use this platform to continue to encourage journalists, advocates to please report these human rights violations that are happening in Cameroon, in Niger, in Mauritania, in Ethiopia, in Mali, Somalia, all these African countries that are suffering or are going through various human rights issues and human rights violations. And thirdly, to my advocates and community organizers, this is time for us to speak up, to stand back and stand up and fight back, right? The narrative that we're trying to portray that is, welcoming people with dignity. Immigration is a Black issue, right? Immigration is a human rights issue. People are not wanting to migrate just because, but because of home is no longer safe, right? And so if people are migrating and trying to find a place to seek safety, a chance to live, a chance to be alive, right? Let's give them that protection, again, with dignity. So this is an opportunity for us to spread the word with the intention that we are pushing the hashtag for that immigration is a Black issue. We should welcome people with dignity. We've seen so much evil from this current administration, an outright continuation of the previous administration's policy, which is an exact opposite of all the promises this administration made. We've seen the asylum ban, right? We've seen the failure to end some of the evil policies that was brought forth by the Trump administration, like the 3042 and MPP took so much effort to put these things down. However, we see that there is just an outright intention by the administration to continue to deny asylum seekers the right to seek safety, and the externalization of the border, where we see that they're making accords with Mexico and Panama right now to stop immigrants from coming to the United States to seek safety. Just a lot of issues across the board, right? So this is an opportunity for us to continue to educate ourselves about this issue and stand up and speak up. We're going to be relaunching the ask for redesignation and extension for Cameroon TPS. So I'm using this platform to call on everyone that's on this call, right? To join this ask as we continue to try to protect individuals who have faced violence in detention, who are at risk of being deported back to these dangerous conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. Fabrice, I'm going to kind of give you the last word, wondering both what you hope people will take away from this, but I'm also curious, we're here a year after TPS was granted. I'm wondering, how do you think about the future? Kind of what's your dream for where things end up for you?
Well, right now, I would say I'm really frustrated, given the fact that my people are now, they are now feeling like the problem we have home is a new normal, which is actually not normal at all. There is a lot going on in Cameroon and getting worse than I thought it was. That is not being reported, as Daniel rightly said before. I would encourage each and every one of us here Cameroonians to expose as much as you can whatsoever is happening back there in Cameroon. Because we are not just fighting for those that are here. We still have people back home in Cameroon. And we must expose this. We must be transparent enough to be able to go through all these challenges that we have. So I would encourage us to expose. Whatsoever is happening back there in Cameroon, don't be scared. Put it out there. That is what the Cameroonian government want us to do. They want us to feel like it is a new normal and keep quiet while people keep dying. As I'm talking to you, I have a friend that was killed, a friend and a sister that was shot last year, and her husband was arrested, and less than 2-year-old child with his elder brother, which is about 13 years old, was taken and thrown out of their house about close to about like 20 miles away from their home in the middle of the night. And to date, this man is still in detention for doing nothing. He did nothing. This is a similar situation to all those asylum seekers that are coming here in the United States to seek for asylum. So there is a lot going on, and there are a lot of people that are still being detained in Cameroon, and the Cameroonian government is trying to act like, okay, nothing is happening. And we take it upon ourselves that it is normal for people to die. And we feel like we've been through this too much that it is just okay for us to watch people die. Please, I would really want to emphasize on these issues of exposing what is happening in Cameroon, because we need a lot of that to be able to convince this government, even though they know what is happening, but they don't want to accept it. But we want them to see it right before their eyes and before everyone in the United States and the world at large. So that is just what I can say. And to emphasize on Daniel's point, please join Cameroon Advocacy Network. This is a home for us. We are stronger together, and we would go through this difficult situation only if we can come together, put our heads together, and push forward with these struggles. Thank you so much.
That was a beautiful note to close on. Thank you so much for being here, Fabrice, Daniel, Bobby. I'm going to put up a slide right now. We have a survey that we'd love folks to fill out before you leave. But, just a few closing thoughts. There are so many issues, in the world, and there's so many issues. One thing we talk about in the Gulf States Newsroom all the time, there's so many issues in this region, there's so many problems. And I think one of the things that really can keep us going is, like you were saying, Fabrice, people working together, raising awareness. And I'm so glad that we were able to tell this story, because it's not the story that you might think, that the Gulf States Newsroom might tell, or that would come out of our states. But I'm so glad that we were able to put a spotlight on this issue and how it is so relevant for the region. And just some words that really resonated with me in terms of thoughts to take away is, dignity. I think that's a word that really has stuck with me. And I hope that we can really carry that out, in so many aspects of our lives, just thinking about, dignity to those around us. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for being patient. Thank you for dealing with our technical difficulties. Really happy to do this. I'm so happy that so many of you stuck around to listen and to have this conversation. Please fill out this survey. We'll be sending out an email with that as well. It's quick, it's easy. And yes, thank you so much, Bobby, also for doing this work, type investigations, for helping us to, be able to put so much time and energy into the story.